An Alabama Supreme Court ruled that frozen embryos are children. Not embryos, but children, actually. And those who destroyed them can be held liable for wrongful death. This brought IVF treatments at 3 out of 5 clinics in the state to a screeching halt. Although the state's attorney general says he has no intention of prosecuting IVF families or providers. Jen Sullivan has the report.
To now be told that there are even fewer options available is heartbreaking.
Rebecca Matthews is the mother to 2 children born through IVF. IVF is when an egg is removed from a woman's body and combined with sperm inside a laboratory before being implanted. It's a multi-stage treatment that can cost thousands of dollars. Some fertility doctors in Alabama say the court's ruling hurts patients.
This ruling makes it impossible for me to offer IVF. This means that my patients won't be able to access the best fertility care.
Alabama lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are working to immediately pass legislation to protect IVF.
As lawmakers, we focus on solving the problem immediately, so that family that's has an appointment on March 11th will be able to go through with this process.
House Democrats introduced a bill that would establish fertilized human eggs stored outside a uterus aren't considered human beings under state law. I'm Jen Sullivan reporting.
This ruling is bringing up the debate about whether or not an embryo is a child. A majority of Americans think so, but opinion is not fact. So we'll just ask the doctor. Joining me now is Dr. Yolandra Hancock. She is a pediatrician and a health and wellness expert. Dr. Yola, is an embryo a child?
I can't believe in 2024 we even have to ask the question. Absolutely not. We know that in the development of a baby who's born after about 9 or 10 weeks, it starts out as a zygote. When the sperm and egg meet, about 5 or 6 days later, it becomes an embryo. It doesn't become a fetus until 10 weeks later. This is really an issue of absurdity. It has nothing to do with science and everything to do with politics. An embryo only has a slightly beating heart, limbs, and a neural tube. An embryo doesn't even have a brain, so to call it a child is just ridiculous.
Right, and so if someone is doing an IVF treatment and they do an egg retrieval and they get their eggs and then they do an embryo transfer, say on day 5, you may transfer 2, 3, 4 embryos. There's a great chance, an extraordinary chance, that none of them will be viable. And in fact, some of them they won't even transfer because they're not viable. My point being, how could, just given what we know from basic IVF procedures, how could they possibly think, even as a political matter, that this makes sense? Like, is this just that the public doesn't understand?
I think what people equate a heartbeat as a life that can exist. Simply because an embryo has a beating heart does not equate it to it being a child. And you bring up a good point. It's all about viability. That's how a lot of abortion decisions are made, based on the definition of viability. There's no specific definition. It's about a consensus and looking at survivability of a fetus, not an embryo. At around 24 weeks is the consensus about survivability. A fetus, then baby born at 24 weeks
right.
has about a 50%
talk about the first couple of days of a process that might not even work. I got to move on because there's a couple other stories I want to get your genius on. Yes. First of all, tragic news. The world is mourning the loss of HIV/AIDS activist Hadia Broadbent at 39 years old. We first learned her story when she was a young girl. Diagnosed at 3 with HIV, she appeared on the Oprah Show when she was 11 years old. And she has spent her life working to remove the stigma surrounding the diagnosis. She got this disease from her mother, who was battling drug addiction. She was told she wouldn't live past 5 years old. Why does this disease impact children worse than the parent who gave it to them sometimes?
There's several reasons why, Mark. It's HIV itself. We know that less than 60% of children who were exposed to HIV that have now become positive are actually on antiretroviral drugs. And so a good number of children are actually dealing with HIV and AIDS. So you're talking about impact on the immune system, having more frequent infections and more severe infections with a huge hit to their immune system. The second, for those who are on antiretroviral medications, there are some significant side effects, things like high cholesterol. Some studies show impairment in terms of cognitive functioning. And then you have to think about the psychosocial components. To grow up from a little child through adolescence into adulthood with dealing with HIV, having to take medication, it's a hard road. She did an amazing job in terms of showing up in a resilient fashion and being such a change agent to allow the stigma to be addressed, but children are still dealing with it. We have a good number of adolescent patients who choose not to take HIV medication, not to mention all the other components in having a parent or parents who are either surviving having HIV and AIDS or having died from it.
Wow, it's a powerful story. The information that the nation has gotten, the learning lessons that we've acquired from this young woman and now this grown woman who just left us are extraordinary. I send so much comfort and love to her family and everyone who was inspired by her, and hopefully we've learned enough to prevent future illness, to prevent future disease, to really win this war on HIV/AIDS. Dr. Yolandra, I want to thank you so much for joining me. It's been always a pleasure to have you.